Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 9th annual Recovery Celebration. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ingrid Gillespie, Director of Prevention at Liberation Programs. I've been a member of a committee that's worked on this event for the past 9 years, and as many of you know, it takes a village. So at this time, I'd like to see if everyone on the planning committee could just raise your hands and let people know who you are. Could we have raised, I think they might be all over. There's Joyce, there's Jacqueline. I don't know where the rest are, but Thea, okay, yay, thank you. Timber, Alexa from Glorious Recovery, from Liberation Programs. We have John Hamilton, Fiona, we have Robert Curry. Raise your hand, Robert, at the back. So again, many of us worked on this. So this year, we decided to change the event format a little bit. In addition to celebrating recovery, which is what we're all about, we're going to be looking at ways to promote and maintain success in recovery. So for today's nonpartisan discussion, we've assembled a wonderful group of panelists chosen because they've been really proactive in supporting recovery in one way or another. Before we get to that, I'd like to bring up Bill Mitchell, 80-year resident of Westport, former, almost 80, sorry. Former co-owner of Mitchell Stores, and probably one of the most recognizable faces in Fairfield County. Bill's been an indispensable part of our recovery celebrations, from hosting them at his flagship store here in Westport, or finding other venues, to drawing on his many, many friends and connections to ask them to speak or participate, and even sing. Bill, as always, such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, everybody. By the way, clarification, Ingrid, I'm not 80 yet. It's 79, and I got to also say that when some people didn't know where the Westport Library was, I said, it's right next to the police station. I know it very well growing up here. We won't get into that tonight. Ingrid, thanks, and thank you all for coming to our beautiful library. And I must just say that the CEO of the library unfortunately tested again positive for COVID, so he can't be with us tonight. But I must tell you, those of you who are not familiar with the Westport Public Library, it's a gem. And they work with all of us on this event times 100, so thank you for that. I also just want to say, and then I'll get into the introduction here, that the speakers you will hear tonight and up on the dais here, I know the people I asked to come, and I know that the other members who asked to come, everybody said yes before I could finish which takes me 20 minutes to say one word. But so I thank you all for coming tonight, all of you, this afternoon. And you know, of course I am really happy to be here because events like this are hugely important. Not just for someone like me who's been in recovery for decades, and by the way, I should have opened up, I'm Bill Mitchell, I'm an alcoholic. I've been doing that I'm blessed to be able to say that for now a few decades. But for people in early recovery, that I know that there are a few people here today, you know, we climbed a lot of mountains to get here and to stay here, and particularly for those of you who have been subjected and impacted by substance abuse. I know that there are people here who have lost their children. I can think of nothing worse, but you're here to support. And I have now the really good pleasure of introducing another native Westporter who actually worked at Mitchell's store here in Westport, growing up, high school, college, and she had a dream. She dreamed that she wanted to go to Broadway. She studied New York, Paris, came back. I mean, we have someone here that's a co-host of the Today Show and a U.S. Senator. These guys, they just didn't make it overnight. And it's a crapshoot for her. So she couldn't get she auditioned, nothing, went down to Wall Street, had a career, and then it happened. She auditioned for a show I know you've probably all seen. I know I've seen it a lot with her, and when she was in it, Phantom of the Opera. And if you remember nothing else about today, you will remember the opening and the closing. As I said, this performer climbed a lot of mountains. I know we all did, those of us in recovery. And it's very fitting that she will sing Climb Every Mountain. Terry Eld, the sister I never had. Welcome and thank you.
Good afternoon. Climb every mountain, search high and low, follow every byway, every path you know. Climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every rainbow, till you find your dream. A dream that will need all the love you can give every day of your life, for as long as you live. Climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every rainbow, till you find your dream. A dream that will need all the love you can give every day of your life, for as long as you live. Climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every rainbow, till you find your dream.
Thank you, Terry. That was absolutely beautiful and just the best song for today's event. So our theme this year is Recovery, the Road Together. And sometimes walking that road can feel like climbing a mountain. But today we're going to be exploring how we can make that climb feel a little less steep. We have community leaders who will share efforts being made here in Connecticut to address substance use. And our panel discussion this afternoon focuses on recovery capital. If you're not familiar with the term, recovery capital is not about investment banking, for those of you in banking, or natural disasters, or anything like that. Simply put, recovery capital is whatever resources someone in recovery has on hand to help achieve and maintain recovery. Those resources cover things from basic physical needs to the less tangible, but no less important emotional needs, like a strong support network. Someone who's helping build a strong support network for early prevention is Joyce Sixsmith. Joyce is a Westport resident and president of Ram Council Foundation from New Canaan, teens who promote substance-free living and healthy decision-making. She is also the Connections Counselor at Darien High School. Joyce will be introducing our welcoming speaker. Joyce?
Thank you, everyone. First of all, I just want to say, yay, Westport. This has been my hometown for many years, and what a joy it is that the Westport Library Bill, thank you for connecting with the director, has this beautiful event, such an important event with a wonderful mission. First Selectman, Westporter Jennifer Tooker has long been a public servant in our community, a member of the Board of Finance, a member of the Board of Education, a member of Westport Conservation Commission, extensive experience in business in her personal career, and on the Women's Business Development Council. She deeply cares about education, served as a member of the Board of Directors of the State Education Resource Center and the Education Commission for the Diocese of Bridgeport. Jen is very personally focused on the social, emotional health of our community, as she has led the charge and launched our Westport Together, which is a group whose mission is to promote positive development of youth who eventually become adults. The alliance between the town and the Westport schools revitalized and rebranded its long-standing partnership to engage more partners and expand this mission, and with Jen's guidance, they have succeeded. She is deeply committed to both programming, meaning prevention, and providing treatment services for substance use and other mental health issues, and of course, supports recovery. Jen Tooker's goal, we spoke nicely on the phone, she said so beautifully, she wants all residents to feel safe and that they belong. She is honored to be part of our recovery celebration today. She lives in town with her husband and their 3 wonderful children, Jack, Riley, and Nicole. Hold on. I just want to say, is this the first time we've had 3 women selectmen in our town? Jen is at the top of the list. We are so blessed. We welcome you with pride and joy. Jennifer Tooker.
Well, that was an absolutely wonderful introduction, Joyce. Thank you so much. Can you tell we're friends? It is my pleasure and honor to welcome all of you on behalf of myself and Second Selectwoman Andrea Moore, who is also here today, to Westport. There she is. As Joyce mentioned, I talk frequently about the top 5 priorities of our administration, and one of them is to ensure that everybody, not just residents, but visitors and business owners alike, feel like they belong in Westport, feel like they're heard, feel like they're safe. And you're probably all looking at me and thinking that's quite a soft goal, and how do you actually show any measurement on that or any improvement on that? And what I will say is our Westport Together Alliance, which Joyce mentioned, which is really the hard work is being done by our Department of Human Services, and the director of that department is here today, Elaine Dano, in the back there. We work tirelessly to provide programming and services on a wide variety of issues. And so social, emotional health and well-being issues, and not only for youth, but for all ages. And especially as we come out of the pandemic, I don't think I have to tell this group, we have a lot of fragile residents and business owners and visitors alike. People are much more fragile coming out of the pandemic than they went in. And I have that in my own family as well, so I know it to be true. And so we are absolutely delighted to be hosting this conversation today. We're honored to be hosting it. We love Bill Mitchell in this in this community. And so I want to say thank you to Liberation for everything you do and for choosing Westport today. Thank you to all the co-sponsors for this event and for being here with us today. And we have a fabulous panel discussion that will be moderated by Craig Melville, and we are super excited. And so without further ado, let's move on with the program. Thank you all for being here.
Well, I can honestly say that I'll say it publicly, I say it privately, and all those who want to listen. We are so blessed to have both of our select women in Westport. Andrea, thank you for coming. And Jen, you're a gem. Jen is a gem. So thank you. It's now my real privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, someone I've known for a long time, Senator Richard Blumenthal. Back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when Senator Blumenthal was U.S. Attorney here in Connecticut, he spent his days, a lot of time, prosecuting drug traffickers. Now, 45 years later, he's serving his second term in the U.S. Senate and continuing to help his constituents stay safe and healthy. He secured millions of dollars in federal funds for behavioral health care providers. And this past summer, along with Senator Chris Murphy, he reintroduced the Behavioral Health Coverage Transparency Act to try to keep insurance companies from unfairly denying coverage for issues like substance use disorder. A few weeks ago, the senator spoke at an overdose awareness day in Hartford. He pointed out that last year, our state lost more than 1,500 people to drug overdoses, which are now the leading cause of unintentional deaths in our state of Connecticut. The senator pledged to honor their loss with action. Please join me in welcoming Senator Richard Blumenthal, an ally and an advocate for all of us here.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. The Westport Library is alive. If you walk down the hallway, there are meeting rooms that are filled and young people actually taking out real books. When I was growing up, I spent a lot of time in Westport, and there were only real books. But that's another story. You know, there's a reason why no one says no to Bill Mitchell. First of all, he's a tough guy. One of my 4 children, one of my sons, worked for him in one of his stores and went on to become a Navy SEAL. And he said it was pretty good training working for Bill. But Bill, really, I don't know anyone who is more generous, more charitable, or who has a bigger heart for community, for people who just need a hand. He and his family have been path breakers and trailblazers in so many different areas, and he has opened his heart and his arms and his stores to such good causes. I want to thank all my colleagues who are here today, who will speak much more eloquently than I. The title of my remarks, keynote remarks, is way more than I'm going to give you because there are people here who know way more than I do. So my thanks to Tony and Lucy and Jamie, but particular thanks to Stephen Stone, who is sharing his story and who has come forward. And I will tell you, and if you remember nothing else, I have such admiration and awe for people in recovery who are sharing their stories with the world. Such courage and strength. Thank you, Stephen, and everyone who's in recovery who will be sharing their story here. And that word is the right one. Celebrate. We should celebrate those kinds of really human qualities and encourage them and support them. And that's what I've tried to do in my work as a prosecutor I was U.S. Attorney, as Bill said, the Chief Federal Prosecutor. I was also Attorney General for 20 years. And so I've worked with all of the law enforcement agencies that have responsibility in this area. And as a senator, I've worked to support them, provide more money and resources for them, because we are in the midst of an epidemic, often an overused word, but in this instance, absolutely right. We're in the midst of an epidemic that has raised death rates by 11%, 2020 to 2021, 11%, 1,513 people last year, and it's going to be higher this year. Those are needless preventable deaths from just overdoses, not even measuring the losses in people's futures who are surviving. And we need to do more on law enforcement. I think we need to face the fact that our police, our drug enforcement agents at every level, federal, state, local, need that support. That's the reason why we've increased the budget for the DEA by $85 million. I've sought even more, why we've passed a high-intensity drug trafficking program to focus on the areas where not only use, but trafficking is most intense. And at the border, the Customs and Border Protection agents need help, more technology, more scanning devices at the ports of entry, more support that they can use in technology and surveillance and numbers and training. But the simple fact is, we're not going to arrest our way. We're not going to jail our way. We're not going to prosecute our way out of this epidemic. And you all know that, but not all of America does. Not all of America understands that, as Jen Tooker said so well, we are in the midst of a mental health crisis in this country. Partly it's the result of the pandemic, the isolation, the stress, the anxiety. Partly it may be a variety of other factors that you know, perhaps better than I, but you know the symptoms. Domestic violence has increased drastically. Overdoses of fentanyl have increased rapidly. Other kinds of deep-seated issues have been aggravated. And so I think what we need to do as part of this recovery effort is to support the agencies and the counselors and the experts who provide this kind of solution to the behavioral health and mental health issues that we face. We've been fighting synthetic opioids for a long time. I began going after Purdue Pharma 15 years ago because of the effects of OxyContin. And I'm looking at young people who are here and thinking of my own children who were exposed to these painkillers for simple athletic injuries. Every one of my kids has broken something in athletics. Everyone here, I'm sure, knows children who have, and they get a month's supply of OxyContin. That happened years ago because Purdue Pharma pushed it on America. Synthetic opioids have been an issue for a long time. What has elevated and increased the challenges surrounding those synthetic opioids are, in fact, these mental health issues. And so, as Bill mentioned, we have begun, and it's only a beginning, to provide more federal support, the $4 billion this year in aid for opioid abuse programs, $315 million for certified behavioral health clinics, $857 million for mental health block grants. What you need to know about these numbers is they're not enough. They're way too low in terms of facing the crisis. So if I have a plea to you, it is demanding that the United States Congress and our president, that all of us at the federal level do more to support these programs, it should be bipartisan. It must be bipartisan. And it has to go to organizations like liberation programs. I've been a long-time supporter of liberation programs. I'm very proud of the fact that we used an earmark. Now it's known as congressionally directed spending, because you remember the earmarks we used to the Bridge to Nowhere. But we are now using it to support programs like Liberation. And so, you know, a particular thanks to John Hamilton and Ingrid Gillespie, and to all of their great staff, including Maggie Young, who will be on the panel. And I can't think of a tougher job anywhere than to be Chief Recovery Officer at Liberation Programs. Just think of it, Chief Recovery Officer. Thank you, Maggie. And there are efforts like Liberation Programs going on all over the state. We got a similar grant for the Waterbury Police Department. Waterbury Police Department for its Warm Handoff program. What is a warm handoff program? Well, again, taking law enforcement. Arrest someone, okay. Somebody who's overdosed, put them in the criminal justice system. That's not going to provide alone a road to recovery. The handoff is to social service agents and people who can provide treatment and caring and put a roof over that person's head when she or he are homeless. The McCall Center for Behavioral Health in Torrington that does this kind of treatment long-term with the patience and focus. $1 million for them is a really big deal. But there are other programs all around the state of Connecticut. Their names are not known to you. I'm not going to bore you with them now, but they are real heroes in this effort. And they are addressing not just the overdoses, but the substance abuse disorder issues. And I'll just finish on this note. I serve on the Armed Services Committee and the Judiciary Committee, which both have a lot to do with this issue, but I also serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee. And as you may know, veterans take their lives at a far higher rate than our general population. Veterans, many of them, have been addicted to those synthetic opioids because they were prescribed them by our VA hospitals. Many veterans, because of PTS that's undiagnosed, seek relief in that way. We've just passed, and I'm very proud to have helped to lead the effort, a measure in the United States Congress called the PACT Act. It provides care and benefits for the first time to veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars who were exposed to burn pits and other toxic or poisonous chemicals on the battlefield, and as a result are afflicted with cancer, 23 different types of cancer, emphysema, hypertension, all kinds of physical issues that manifest years after they leave the service. Now they'll get care and benefits, but many of them sought relief from opioids. This issue is one that affects our veterans more than our general population, and it also raises issues of equity. Because as we learned in the pandemic, communities of color suffered from that epidemic more than people generally, and this issue affects them more heavily. So it is an equity issue, it is a public health issue, it is an imperative for all of us to support effective action. And I thank all of you for being here today and committing to being part of the solution, which will take some real grit and grace, insight and understanding, but as serious and sometimes depressing it may be to live in this country with our divisions and disagreements, I think we can come together on this issue and say, we're Americans, we're going to deal with this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Your remarks were really compelling and heartwarming. And you left us on a note of hope, which is why we're here today, to celebrate some of the hopeful remarks that we hope to get accomplished. And I know you've got to run, so go. Now I'd like to introduce someone that you probably all know, and he is our resident Master of Ceremonies, John Hamilton. John is President and CEO of Liberation Programs, has more than 30 years of experience in the fields of addiction, treatment, and prevention. John chairs the advisory board for the Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. He also has a slew of clinical certifications and titles, making him more than qualified to host all of our recovery events, which it seems like he's doing every other Sunday. And we are grateful that John is here once again, and he is also my dear friend, someone who I really respect and admire for all he gives back. Thank you, John Hamilton.
Thank you, Bill Mitchell. Again, you can't say no to Bill Mitchell. It's great to see so many friends out there. Senator Blumenthal, thank you for that congressional discretionary dollars. A nice little segue of why we're here today, because with those dollars, we were able to fund 2 family recovery coaches. Do you hear that, Craig? Family recovery coaches to actually follow the family of the loved ones that may be getting their pathway of recovery, to see that the loved ones, the family members, deserve recovery as well. So that was all thanks to Senator Blumenthal, and again, we couldn't be happier with all the support we get from him. He is unbelievable. In our agency, we try to hire people that have good listening skills and listen to the people that we serve and that are kind and caring. I think Senator Blumenthal personifies what we want in our agencies, because he does that every day. He does that for the people of Connecticut. He does that for our country, and we are so grateful to have him here in Connecticut. Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. And thank you, First Select Woman Tooker. I love the idea that you talked about belonging, because addiction, the opposite of addiction, is connection. Mental health is about feeling lovable, capable, and connected. It's about belonging. And that's why we're here today, is to connect everyone. We've also fortunate, I see Elaine here from the city, that Westport is so responsive to understand that our kids are dealing with stress, pre-COVID, post-COVID, and they actually support the town of Westport, one of Liberation's licensed and alcohol and drug counselors in the high school. That's pretty progressive to actually have a presence in the high school, because they know kids who really need to navigate this and be able to get that support in the high school. I've also been involved in Westport over the years in risky behavior forums. People might remember, if they've been involved in the community years ago with Positive Directions, we ran these forums. And one forum that really struck out was a forum on stress for kids in this community. And all the parents were worried about the stress in the community. So then we talked to the kids, and what did we find out? The greatest stressor that these kids felt in the community was their parents. So I just say that today to the parents that are out there, to challenge you to take some stress away from your kids. Don't be the stressor, be the stress relief in your kids' lives. And again, it's more important to show people how much you care before you show them how much you know. And we've already had speakers talking about how much they care, which is wonderful. We also recognize that even though Senator Blumenthal did a great shout out for Liberation Programs, and thanks for the staff here today, and we have board members like John Bassler here and Cindy Shaw. Thank you for your support. We have a great staff, we have a great board, but we also recognize there are other providers here And there are recovery coaches, and most importantly, there are multiple pathways to recovery. And the pathway that's the right pathway is the pathway someone's going to take. Whether it's adventure recovery, to find adventure as their pathway, or glorious recovery, it's all a different pathway, and we respect and support them all. So it's great to see our lawmakers making inroads in local and national levels, but it's more important to remember that when we talk about recovery, we're talking about individuals. Recovery starts with the individual and everyone's story, and as I said, everyone's pathway is different. So our next speaker, Steve, is someone who's in long-term recovery. People may know him because he's worked in some of the treatment centers around here and may be familiar to some of the people that are in this audience. But before he started to work in this field, he had to first work on finding his pathway of recovery. He's going to share a little bit about that today. Steve.
Hey everybody, how's everybody doing? Good. So I just want to start off by thanking everybody who put this event together and for allowing me to come here and speak with you. It's really an honor and a privilege to be asked to share my experience with recovery. So I'll just get started. My sobriety started on May 5th of 2016, which is a day I actually don't remember. The day before, I had overdosed at my parents' house on fentanyl, having thought that it was heroin, which left me unable to build short-term memories for several days. I remember very little of those days, except waking up confused to find a clipboard next to my bed explaining what had happened. I vaguely recall supportive peers coming to see me, but I remember most is the fear. Even more terrifying was the fact that I knew the fear that I felt would not keep me sober for long. Fortunately, thanks to a tremendous amount of grace, an incredibly loving, supportive family, and countless peers and professionals along the way, I have not had a drink or a drug since. I come from a normal family, whatever that means. I have two wonderful parents who have loved and supported me for as long as I can remember. I have an older brother who I consider to be disturbingly well-adjusted to life. On paper, there isn't any one thing that I could point to that made me an addict. Nonetheless, I've struggled with this disease tremendously over the years. I struggled with my mental health in middle school, mainly with anxiety and depression, and by the time I was in high school, I was an addict ready to bloom. I got drunk for the first time when I was 13 and quickly discovered the power that substances held. As I got older, the frequency of my use increased, along with my willingness to try new substances. That said, I somehow managed to graduate high school and got into college, despite my declining GPA and increased use. Looking back, I can clearly see the delusion of active addiction. At the time, if you had asked somebody who cared about me, they would have said that they were worried and that I was clearly not heading in the right direction. On the other hand, if you had asked me, I would have said that I'd never been better. That's the magic of substances. It doesn't matter what's going on out here. Inside, I could feel great. I had what I call the typical addict college experience. I had a good time for a bit, wasted a ton of my parents' money, and it ended up having to withdraw from school. By the time I was 20, my disease had progressed to the point that I had to be using something all day, every day. During the summer of 2010, my family had staged an intervention for me, and I went to treatment for the first time. While I was incredibly angry and cruel towards my family at that time, today I can look back with gratitude at their courageous action. While I didn't stay sober following treatment, I do credit that facility with saving my life, because it was there that I, for the first time, found out that recovery was possible and met people that I could identify with. From 2011 to 2013, my addiction progressed. In short order, I found myself addicted to prescription painkillers, which quickly led to my becoming an intravenous heroin user. During that time, I would burn my life to the ground repeatedly, eventually asking for help once I ran out of money, only to return to active use shortly after. In the summer of 2013, I found myself in detox one more time, but this time I was willing to try something a little different. My father's colleague, a man 16 years sober, took me to a 12-step meeting, introduced me around, and helped me to find other meetings. That was only possible because he had been open about his recovery, a risk that he took which saved my life. However, my journey to recovery was not over. I don't learn things easily, and I had plenty left to learn. My family continued to support me as best they could, and thankfully I met dozens of men and women who took time out of their lives to help what I assumed they imagined was a lost cause. What I pray will be my final relapse started in April of 2016 after 11 months of sobriety. I was sure that I could not get better, and I suspect that many others felt the same way. I was a lost cause. But something in me had changed. I can't tell you what or why, but I jumped back into recovery head first. Instead of being dishonest, I chose honesty. Instead of running away from my discomfort, I embraced it. I vividly recall talking with my sponsor, throwing my hands in the air and saying, "How am I supposed to do this?" His response sticks with me to this day. He said, "You don't have to figure this out alone. You simply have to do what the people who came before you did." So that's exactly what I've been doing. I got active in a 12-step program. I learned to ask for help, and when I needed, I got help from professionals. Over the following 2,349 days, countless miracles have transpired. I don't hate myself anymore, and I no longer run from my pain. I have rebuilt the relationships I strained or destroyed, and I've made amends for the pain that I caused. I also found my calling, becoming a professional in the recovery field, where each day I get to help others on their journey out of the pit of addiction. I even started my own business as a recovery coach this past winter. I have made numerous friends and been witness to hundreds of transformed lives. I have a purpose today. The demons that used to run me around no longer have a voice. Just a few weeks ago, I married the most incredible woman in the world, who's sitting right there. I say all these things not to gloat. I couldn't have done it alone. And I was incredibly privileged to have access to the resources that I needed. I say this because I want each of you to know that recovery is possible. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum. We all need support. But if I can do it, I truly believe that anybody can. So if you or somebody you love is struggling with this disease, you are not alone. There is no shame in it, and there are people who care and would like nothing more than to help. There's, in fact, a whole room right now full of those people. I'd like to thank you all for allowing me to speak with you and fulfill my purpose. God bless.
Thank you, Steve, and congratulations, Danielle. I think you got a keeper there. Seems like a nice guy. You saw on the far right when Steve had his photos up there, he was at the New Canaan Vigil, and that's where we first heard Steve's story, and thanks to the generosity of Paul Reinhardt, who's here, we brought him back here. And I said, "Steve, your story was compelling. Can you come to Westport on October 8th? And Steve said, "Let me think, I'm getting married and have a honeymoon. Yeah, I'll be back. Absolutely. I'm back in 48 hours, so I think I'll be rested and ready." Never even, without a flinch, didn't say no. He was up for it because he knew he could touch somebody's life today that's out in this audience. It's like over 200 people, by the way, as I think we did with our count. It's just unbelievable that, again, without hesitation, I thank you for that, Steve. And I think it points out one of a key concept in recovery, which is service, right? Steve is in the service of others. So it's this paradox. To keep it for Steve, he needs to give it away. And he did that again today, and we were the recipients. Thank you, Steve. All right, it's time for our panel discussion, titled Building Recovery Capital. In other words, helping those in recovery discover and hold onto the resources that will help them achieve long-term recovery. These resources are both personal and practical. On the personal side, we're going to be talking about recovery coaching. While on the practical side, we're going to be discussing issues around recovery housing. All our panelists today have been given brief memos on the two topics. Each panelist has in some way shown a commitment to improve the state of recovery in Connecticut. First, from the left, is former Connecticut State Senator Tony Boucher, who has been a longtime advocate for prevention. Both Drug-Free America and the Parent Coalition for Drug-Free Youth presented her with Legislator of the Year awards because of her work. She regularly takes part in recovery and prevention events throughout the state. That's her photo up there. But that's actually her in real life on the panel. It's uncanny resemblance. All right. Next to Tony is Lucy Datham, Connecticut State Representative for New Canaan and Norwalk. That's her photo as well. As a member of the House Insurance and Real Estate Committee, Lucy has sponsored bills requiring health insurance companies to cover a number of recovery resources, including detox, which we actually call today withdrawal management, medically assisted and inpatient treatment, as well as peer recovery support services, which will include recovery coaching. So, Lucy. Third, near and dear to my heart, is our one and only Maggie Young. Maggie Young is the Chief Recovery Officer at Liberation House and first Chief Recovery Officer in Connecticut, and I think we've figured out the first Chief Recovery Officer in America. I know we have Cindy Shore here. You're a Chief Recovery Officer as well, but you stole it from us. Let's just face it. That's okay. We're all in this together. You share it. We share that because there's nothing that represents what we do at the core of the work that we do at Liberation. Then at the end of the day, it's all about recovery. So as a clinician and administrator, Maggie oversees addiction and prevention programs as well as inpatient and outpatient treatment. She's also the board president of CCAR, Connecticut Community of Addiction and Recovery. CCAR trains recovery coaches and awards the recovery coaches the professional designation to those who meet their requirements. And last but not least, my friend Jamie Stevenson is here. Jamie has served for 10 years as the first select woman for the town of Darien. Jamie has also been a strong supporter of prevention, treatment, and recovery programs, participating in legislative forums time and time again. But most importantly, Jamie is someone who has shared that has a family connection to substance use disorder and has spoken openly on its impact that it's had on her family. I hope you agree that our panelists bring incredible expertise to the table. And now, we've come to the moderator of this afternoon's discussion, Craig Melvin. Many of you know Craig Melvin, who's in the front row here, as one of the co-hosts of the Today Show. He's also hosted Dateline and was a longtime anchor of MSNBC. And last year, Craig opened up in a very personal way in his book called Pops, Learning to be a Son and a Father. And in it, he wrote about fatherhood, addiction and recovery, and what he's learned from all that. We're so happy to have him here. Now I bring up Craig Melvin.
Thanks, Craig. Thank you. Good to see you again. Good afternoon. Oh, we can do better than that. Come on. Good afternoon. We've got newlyweds here. Before we dig in, just again, when Bill asked me to moderate today, he actually didn't really ask. It was more of a, here's the date, I expect to see you there. And as many before me have said, you can't really say no to Bill Mitchell because he has been such a shining example for so long in this town and beyond of how those who have been richly blessed have an obligation to bless others. So, Bill, thank you for the invitation. As John mentioned, I wrote the book at the request of my therapist some years ago, who said very politely, you sort of talk about this a lot. Perhaps you should use your story to help others as well, since that's essentially what you do for work. And so when the pandemic hit, I decided to write about my father's own struggled mightily for decades with alcohol addiction. And about 7 years ago, when he retired from the post office, his recreational drinking that had long before become something far more than just recreational drinking, it became daily blackout drinking. And he'd gotten into a fender bender, and our family decided to use that as an opportunity to stage an intervention. And fortunately for us, he showed up at the intervention, blackout drunk, and didn't recall agreeing to go into an inpatient program in Statesboro, Georgia. And he woke up the next morning thinking that he had been kidnapped. And lo and behold, about 3 months later, I went down to visit him, and I could tell immediately that he was a different person. And here was a man who had his first drink at 14 and drank, for the most part, every day for the better part of 40 years. And with the help of a community much like this one, he got the monkey off his back and has been sober now for 5 years. And as a result of that, I have become a part of your community. And I had no idea until I wrote this book how many people in our country are struggling themselves, have lost someone to the disease, or they have someone in their family that they are trying to help. And I say to you, as I've said to so many over the last few years, don't give up on someone. We almost gave up on my father because he was in his late 60s. And quite frankly, we did for a number of years. And then it clicked. And so anyway, that is my story. But I am honored to be here. And I think one of the reasons they ask me is they know that I have to get up at an ungodly hour. So I can't keep you here very long. So we'll keep it moving. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning on the Today Show. 7 a.m. Eastern for 71 years, same place. We encourage you to watch. Or actually, you don't even have to watch. Just turn the TV on, walk away, mind your own business. We still get the ratings points. So our first, it's funny because it's true. Our first topic, as John mentioned, our first topic of discussion is going to be recovery coaching. I know the panelists have all been briefed, but I've been briefed to brief you again. That this is supposed to be a conversation. Apparently, a couple of you are running for office. God bless you. But we want to make sure that this does not turn into a campaign event. Recovery coaching. So for the purposes of our audience, and a lot of you know this, but many of you probably don't, there are many descriptions and definitions of recovery coaching and coaches. But for our purposes this afternoon, we are paraphrasing CCARS. A recovery coach is a personal guide or mentor who promotes recovery and also removes barriers and obstacles to recovery for people seeking recovery or already in recovery from substance use disorder. Recovery coaches act as motivators, cheerleaders, allies, confidants, truth tellers, role models, problem solvers, resource brokers, advocates, and companions. They are not counselors. They are not therapists or sponsors. They stay in their lane. Recovery coaches can be considered part of an overall recovery team working together with physicians, psychiatrists, therapists, sponsors, or other support persons. Sounds like a great idea, right? Sounds like a no-brainer. One major challenge. Currently, recovery coaching is not a so-called billable service. In other words, recovery coaching is not covered by most health insurance plans. As a result, organizations that offer recovery coaching have to rely on grants for funding. And as we all know, that can be quite unreliable. So, our first question to our panelists. As a person vested in supporting recovery, what are your thoughts on making recovery coaching a billable service? And please, all panelists, keep in mind this is about this particular issue. You'll each have 2 minutes to respond. And we'll start down on the far left with former Senator Boucher, and then we'll go down the line. Senator Boucher.
Thank you very much for the question. I appreciate it. Very few people know this, but I've lost 3 family members to addiction, substance abuse, one only to survive it and do well. And through that, it is critical that they had the type of support. And a recovery coach, I think, would have been critical to them. They did have one, had a sponsor, and he is 10 years sober, recovered his family, his job, his self-respect through that. And we're so happy to have at least one good success story. But 2 very young did not survive this process. And if they had had the kind of intervention, they might have been okay. And one of which had a child that is being raised by my sister-in-law. And it's such a tragedy, as every family understands what that is like, and probably why I've been such a zealot on this topic. But absolutely, we should be providing funding for recovery support services, including a coach. And that also means that they have to be certified and trained. Because anytime you put, money behind a government program, you want to see if it's good quality and it is having an impact and a positive outcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and I just wanted to say thank you for hosting today's event and inviting me to be part of the panel. It's great to see my fellow New Canaanite Rams Council here today. It's wonderful. I'm so glad we are talking about peer support. It is an integral part of the recovery process to have someone who has that lived experience to be part of that sort of coaching team to really help that person. I really believe that we need to make sure that it is billable for so many reasons, but we also have to be thinking about the folks that don't have insurance, that are underinsured or don't have insurance, and so maybe that they might be Medicaid recipients. And right now there's only, I think, 41 states that have Medicaid reimbursable peer support services. And one of the things that I'd like to do with my human services hat on is to really expand that, because we need to make sure that these services are available to all. But one of the key things that we need to do is to take the stigma out of these issues. Some people have underlying mental health issues. Some people might have other sort of trauma issues that they've experienced, and having that peer support person there, because no recovery process is the same from individual to individual, but a peer support person is really helping that whole entire team come together and have a successful outcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So right before I started, Steve, I love you. I'm a person in long-term recovery for 30 years. I was grown at Liberation Programs, so I just want to kind of commercial there. And so I am also a recovery coach, and so yes, absolutely, recovery coaching should be billed. On Friday, had a conversation with John Hamilton. I received a call from a family member who was asking, do you offer recovery coaching for someone who actually is already engaged in traditional treatment and also has a therapist, but needs that? It's the non-traditional hours that we actually meet with people. We're not sponsors, we're recovery coaches. There's all of that. So the recovery coaching actually helps with filling in those gaps where the overall goal is to get the person off the couch and to be able to share with them, as you did, right? The story of, this is what's happening in my life, and so it makes it easier for a person to connect, as John mentioned earlier. So yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here and to see so many young people. This message is so important for young people as you grow and mature in your lives. And I want to thank Steve and Craig for sharing your stories. I know that pretty much everybody in this room has either been personally touched or knows of someone for whom substance abuse or misuse has impacted their family. It certainly has ours. And as a family, we went through a very difficult process about 14 years ago where none of the services were reimbursable by insurance, and we had to fight with our insurance companies for years to try and recover just a little bit of the tremendous amount of money that we as a family had to put out. But we did it because we're a family, and that's what this event feels like today with Liberation Programs. You are a family, and I'm so grateful for all of you. Yes, we need to support recovery coaches being billable, but we need to go further. Today, I'm wearing a device that is going to be the future of, hopefully, addiction support and recovery. It's a biometric device that connects with your network, with your recovery coach. And this is going to be the future of how we can get services more instantaneously to the people that need it. So I really look forward to watching that happen over the coming days and years so that we can get the funding for all of these current and future services.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you all also for sticking to time as well. Wow. It's unprecedented. A quick reminder to the audience, by the way, I think most of you, if not all of you, you have index cards. So if you have a question that you would like to pose to a member of the panel, feel free to write the question down on the index card, and you can hand it to one of the volunteers here from RAM wearing their T-shirt. So feel free to do that. Now we're going to move on to our next topic. I would also like to point out something else that was just quite rare. All four of them agreed that yes, the coaches should be billable, in fact. So we're going to move on. We're going to talk about recovery housing now. And again, for most of you, this is well known, but for those of you who are not familiar with recovery housing, by that we mean safe, healthy, substance-free living environments that support individuals in recovery. So recovery housing, it's not in-person treatment at a rehab. It's where people can choose to go after discharge if they feel that they're not ready to go back to their regular lives. My father went to a recovery house for a while. A friend of mine here in town also spent some time in a recovery house as well. Living in recovery housing, it means being with other people who are in recovery and being able to access services and resources to help maintain recovery as well. So some of you might have heard or seen sober living homes around Connecticut. Recovery housing is what helps really foster long-term recovery by reducing the risk of relapse and increasing the chances of getting employment or perhaps making more money. It can also help repair those broken relationships that we've heard a number of folks talk about. So, seems like a no-brainer. Once again, what's the problem here? Well, as we mentioned, there are a number of sober living residences in the state, and even though there are certain national and local standards, not all recovery housing is certified or accredited. So, the question for our panelists: what, if any, certification process should there be for sober living homes, and how best could such a system be funded? So again, 2 minutes, and this time we'll start on this side. Jamie, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Well, first, I'd like to say that it's critical that these facilities are certified and accredited. The story that we have of my daughter who went to a place where she got the services that she needed and then into transitional housing to bridge the gap till we were able to feel safe enough to bring her home, that was not a good environment for her. There really were no standards that were set, and it actually set her back in some ways. So the kind of certification, I feel very confident that with professionals like those that are in this room and sitting right next to me, that America can put together a certification program that can make sure that recovery homes, each and every recovery home, can set a standard that everyone can expect will be the same. So no matter where you or your loved one is going, they can expect the same kind of service.
Thank you. Maggie?
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to speak from the perspective of where there are gaps. And so we have some recovery homes and they're there. So when I think about recovery housing and recovery homes, I absolutely agree that they definitely need to be certified. there needs to be funds that are actually sent in to cover this. In addition, the person who is actually facilitating the housing needs to be certified in recovery, be a recovery coach, as well as the business perspective of it. However, when we start to look at recovery housing for individuals, there's the gap of the 1115 waiver really as of July 1st actually kind of set us back. Now, for decades, we have been talking about, can a person leave from inpatient treatment long enough to secure housing, to secure employment, so that they can save up money, so that they do have a security deposit. And so that is not the case. So a person has to meet medical necessity in order to be in treatment, so they can't leave to go and look for work. So that's created yet another barrier for that. And so for the groups that we work with primarily in liberation programs, we need some funding as well for security deposits. If a person actually meets criteria to get into sober housing, then they're gonna need to pay security deposit to get in there. So there are a few different barriers there that we need to really look at that individual and what their needs are as they need to step over. But the recovery coaching piece of it, which is the support for them to continue to remain sober once they go out, there needs to be the training of that individual. And somehow we need to figure out, how do we, without having a person feeling like they're discriminated against, how do we actually track whether a person really is still in recovery or not? Because that also becomes like an issue.
How could you do that theoretically? How do you?
As of right now, we cannot. And I think it's something that we need to really talk about, because it's if you ask a person, it's almost the same as asking a person, what is your religion? Right? So we can't really say to someone, Steve, how do I know how long? We can't say, can you give me a touch screen result? We can't say those things, because it then creates this barrier, and they start to feel judged by that. So there is that gray area there, which really sets us back, because then the person going into the house may be at risk, because that person who might be managing that house may be using drugs, and they're looking for a recovery community.
Got it. And since I asked you a follow-up question, that will not count against you.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, you stayed to your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you. Lucy.
Well, thank you, Maggie, for that very thoughtful answer. I was really impressed. Thank you. I fully agree that we do need to look at certification so that we really have a standard of care, but the certification process should be a data-driven model, so that we are really on the same page, that we have the right number of services. I have had an opportunity to visit a couple different recovery homes, and you know, there are the 5-star luxury places, and then there are other places that are very sort of basic. And we need to ensure that, you know, whoever you are, whatever zip code you're in, that you have access to quality care. And having a certification process will ensure that. But again, we need to make sure that not only that the recovery homes are available and certified, but then once someone leaves that recovery home and that recovery environment, and they're getting back into their normal home and living circumstances where they may have triggers that cause them to relapse, we need to make sure that we address those. And I think as part of, you know, looking at any sort of certification, that we looked at also maybe some sort of downstepped where an individual is starting to get back into their normal life, and how we can certify those people. And again, I think the peer support coaches and the recovery coaches are an instrumental part of that process. And having that sort of 12-step sponsor is also really important. And I really appreciate what, you know, we were talking about with Mr. Stone, and hearing your background and your road here. And it is something that, you know, people live with, you know, as you had said earlier, for decades. So I think it is very important.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. Senator Boucher.
Well, I think that Lucy mentioned just now, one of the problems is that there are infrastructure needs, and then there's oversight needs. You can't have one without the other. And the infrastructure is vastly different from one to another. You have some that, in talking with those that have actually lived in sober living homes, that they were, some of them, unlivable from a structural standpoint. And of course, there's the 5-star, which costs so much, more even than a nursing home, anywhere from possibly $10,000 to $12,000 a month. So there is a varying degrees of infrastructure, but it is needed. But just as important, if not even more important, is the kind of staffing and oversight that's inside that sober living. There are some horror stories where there have been overdoses in a sober living residence. And that's not what you want to see, the fact that you can find drugs there. And so you need very strong oversight. That's why, again, training for peer coaching and for oversight of a sober living residence is absolutely critical.
Thank you, Senator Boucher. We've got a number of questions here. We don't have a lot of time, but we want to get to as many questions as possible. The questions that we do not get to, I believe we're going to make sure that the panelists get the questions at least, so whoever asked the question can get an answer. I also, we've lived in Westport for 11 years now, and you think you know your neighbors, and then all of a sudden you start reading their handwriting. Some of my neighbors are sociopaths. It's barely legible. Kidding, sort of. This first question is a good question, and feel free to jump in, but also try to keep it tight so we can get to as many as possible. Does access to recovery services, does that access require a medical/non-paid diagnosis? Don't all jump to the mic at once.
So if the question is asking about treatment or housing, so each sober housing has their own criteria. And so that determines the housing, determines who's Karen. The housing determines what their criteria is for that. So it may or it may not. So if you're looking at 3.3 or 3.1, if you're looking at 3.1, which will need a mental health diagnosis.
So that's the case with housing. What about coaching? What about recovery coaching?
Recovery coaching, you can go out for training and you can train. It does not require a diagnosis. Now, with regards to sober living, things of that sort, again, each person determines their criteria for applying and being accepted into the housing.
Is that a system that's working?
I think it leaves out the groups that we talked about, right? So I think that everything that we look at, when we start to look at each area, if the specifics are just, for example, right, we talked about veterans, then we're looking just at veterans. If we're talking solely mental health, then we're looking solely at mental health, and then what is that criteria for that? So I think each one has this silo.
Okay. This next question, how do we get insurance companies into the room and demonstrate more reimbursement? I think I read that properly.
That's actually what I was going to touch on with this as part of it, because it is critical. I heard in insurance testimony over the last several years, many folks who, are stuck in emergency rooms for hours trying to get their approval process to get in, to get checked in. And, it's really not the way you need to start your recovery process. So that is something that we really need to make sure that we do better as a state. But again, it's not just the insured, it's people who are underinsured or people who don't have insurance through Medicaid, and how we can make sure that there is a faster road so that people are able to get the care and the treatment without getting that sort of pre-authorization process, because a lot can happen in that emergency room. You think of your story where you said your dad was blackout drunk. What happens if he's in that emergency room, wakes up, and realizes he doesn't want to be there? So you are losing some critical time. So we need to ensure that our insurance companies are coming in and making sure that things are automatically authorized.
A couple of issues pop up, and one of them is that oftentimes Medicaid reimbursement for in residence is like 3 months, and oftentimes someone needs, more often than not, 11 months or maybe a year. So it's a long-term problem and very costly. One of the things that someone mentioned to me is that you also need detox treatment oftentimes when you're overdosing, and that you need to be tested for it. And oftentimes a test could take 1 whole week to get it. And rapid tests are available, but it's a federal, I think it might be a federal issue with the FDA. Maybe Jamie can weigh in on that.
Sure. I think there's a lot of gaps with this question. You know, thinking back about everybody's path to addiction is different, everybody's path to recovery is different, as was mentioned earlier. But one of the first things that typically happens is a person is transported to the hospital. There might be a required psychological evaluation, and depending on the outcome of that evaluation, you're either kicked out the door, or perhaps you're lucky enough to find a recovery bed somewhere, of which there are never enough recovery beds for people. But certainly for the people that are kicked out the door, you know, it becomes a vicious cycle. And we need to make sure that we have our hospital systems, our physicians, our insurance companies, and our government all working together to put a continuum of service and support together, so that the very first time that someone has to go for an evaluation, they're cared for, they're supported, and that they don't have to worry about how they're going to pay the bills in the future.
Bless you. Thank you. As someone just pointed out to me, the library closes at 5. So I apologize. We've got 5 minutes left. And if you don't know anything about Westport, you should know that we take our library closing times very seriously, especially on Sundays. So we're going to get the rest of these questions to the panelists. I'm going to turn it back over to John. It has been a privilege and an honor. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you for being so punctual and really very funny. And thank you, panelists. Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful job you did. I really do believe recovery coaching is a game changer in our field of treatment and recovery. Fiona and I were at an event on Friday for breast cancer. Everybody sees pink everywhere. I see some people with pink. Absolutely great cause. We support it. Colon cancer, people support that as well. But do people know that more people died in this country of overdoses last year than breast cancer and colon cancer combined? So I think we still have to do a better job of increasing access points. We talk about multiple pathways to recovery, but at Liberation, we're really leaning in on more outreach and engagement. Recovery coaches ask beautiful questions. How can I help you in your recovery today? And what does your recovery look like to you? That's two beautiful questions, right? But not everybody is ready to have the miracle of recovery happen in 2022. So we have our outreach workers just ask, as overdose prevention specialists, how can we keep you alive today? How can we help you today? And what does help look like? So we have to be able to work with people, meet them where they are, and show them how much you care before you show them how much we know. And as you could hear from our panelists, we really do have a lot of love in this room. We have a lot of committed individuals, and I appreciate everyone's efforts. And now I want to turn it over for Ingrid to wrap us up with the closing of all of the recovery time, and with Robert Curry giving the count. Ingrid.
Okay, so again, we tried something a little different this year, but at the end of the day, it's about celebrating recovery, and one of our trademarks is that we have Robert come up and announce the years in recovery in the room, which is an incredible. So Robert, and I'm sensitive to the time, so come on up.
Yes, we don't want to get locked in the library. Anyway, I'm Robert Curry, and I am a alcoholic, drug addict, in recovery, and I get to do this job every year for 9 years. I love it. So, in order to keep it short, would everybody who is in recovery please stand up? Thank you. So, in order to continue to shorten it, would everybody in their first year please sit down? In their first year of recovery, please sit down. Everybody in their 10th year, please sit down. 10 years or more, please sit down. And I don't mean more, I mean up to. And then 10 to 20, please sit down. And then 20 to 30, please sit down. And then 30 to 40, please sit down. And 40 to 50, there's one person left. His name is Lance. And Lance has been my sponsor for 39 years. And is there any? Oh, Stephen, yes. How many?
Well, on October 20th, I'll celebrate 44 years.
Great. Lance, how many? 47. Okay. And total number of sober years in the room, drum roll, 615. 615.
Okay, so we're at the last segment here. I'm going to bring Bill up, but from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank Ram Council kids for coming out and helping us out today. Thank you so much. And we always leave inspired, and we hope that you've left inspired with the discussion and the celebration today. So Bill, take us home real quick.
I dare say that all of us, like myself, in recovery and celebrating recovery today, when we were active, we were so alone. So it's only fitting that we bring Terry back, and she will close with, "You'll never walk alone." Thank you, Terry.